Ready, Greg?
Ready, Jay.
You're listening to The Success Paradigm with your hosts, Jay Atkins and Greg Gray.
Here we go again. We're here with Charley Todd. Charley was born and raised in Fort Myers, Florida, and has a strong passion for local businesses and entrepreneurship. He is the CEO of one of the largest Allstate Insurance Agencies in the country and has also founded or co-founded 4 different businesses. Charley's startup, Via Citrus, has been featured by publications such as Oprah Magazine, Vogue, and Goop as a top 10 e-commerce outlet for gift purchasing. He is currently most motivated by helping others start their own social or for-profit enterprises. Charley attended Stetson University for his business undergrad degree and Columbia University for his postgraduate degree. He currently lives in Atlanta, Georgia with his rescue dog, Riggins. What's up, Charley Todd?
Hey guys, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Good, man. I heard some sirens back there in the background, man. So you must be in downtown Atlanta.
My street especially has been one of the most popular for everything that's been going on from a peaceful protest standpoint. So yeah, there's been a lot of, it's almost, I lived in New York for 8 years. This is the most like New York it's felt this past week.
They just wanted you to segue and not have a culture shock, man. So
yes. I appreciate that for the city.
The reason I invited you on our podcast today, Charley, is when we met, I was just very intrigued by the conversation. You're a very intelligent, well thought out individual, and your perspective is something I can relate with. So, the success you've had at such a young age, and your dad's had major success, and not that you're in the shadow of your father. I think you've just done such a great job of taking what he taught you, and I think it'd be great for everyone to hear those lessons. I mean, I think success can come young. I think it can come old. I don't think there's an age. And I just, I admire you. I mean, I saw you on a stage speaking. You're very articulate. So I'm very excited about interviewing you today on the success paradigm, because this is what it's all about. We really started this because, we always feel that everyone always sees the glory. Your dad was a really successful agent, and having conversations with you, no one really understood the story, right? I mean, he was a massively successful agent, still is. And what we want to do on here is tell the story. And there's a lot of failures, there's a lot of obstacles, there's a lot of hiccups that go along the way. And that's what we want to talk about today, and your journey and your hiccups so far, and your perspective on what you think success is. So let's start with that story. Like, where did it all start for you to create this mindset, this drive, this passion to be great at everything you do and take businesses to the next level?
I mean, what an introduction. Thank you. I've been excited, looking forward to talking, just because the world in which you and I met, and the industries that we share a commonality in, I just don't think that we run across really forward-thinking people that often. And so when you do, it just gets very exciting. So I'm excited to be here and talk a little bit about why I'm passionate about the things I am. But from a story standpoint, I mean, all the credit to my dad for one thing specifically is that he just wasn't afraid to admit a mistake and to examine it. And he grew up on a farm in rural Indiana. And he probably had, he would say probably like 15 jobs, and maybe that's how many he had. But I would say let's go with 10 different jobs until he landed with Allstate Insurance, where he became an incredible agent, right? So I think knowing that he's so willing to talk to me and other people that he mentors and other people that are trying to start a foundation of business and share those things, just like you're trying to get your guests to share those things. I think that's a huge part of why I have been able to be successful, is to learn that you have to be vulnerable. You have to be open. If you give a damn about continuous improvement and about being excellent, then you've got to be self-aware. And I would say from the outset, like, you really, especially this week, and everything that's happening in the world, I think you have to start with wondering, okay, what were my head starts? What were my entitlements? What were my privileges that I was able to have from the get-go? And I think I've had many from a standpoint of having a father that was already successful, not having to worry about how I was going to pay for college, already having a family business that I was going to be able to test out some of my ideas with. So I've had a lot of things go right for me. But I think the things that I've really took pride in, we're trying to mimic some of those ideas of saying, okay, it's all right if you have 10 to 15 things not go the way that you think they're going, as long as you're learning from them and you're improving. And my dad's story is one of that. He didn't really have a business that was working until he was, into his early 30s. And he took a huge risk and moved his whole family to Florida, worked at Sears department store when Allstate was still inside a Sears department store. And he went to people's houses and talked about their, the financial implications and their mortality. I mean, we think about how that would look like in 2020. Have you thought about what that would look like to say, okay, well, I went to the mall. First off, why? And I met somebody there, and they're going to come by on Saturday, and they're going to talk about what might happen if I die to me and my family in my living room. Like, what? And he was so good at it, and so he finally found something that he was great at. And he never put pressure on me to come back to the family business or to do anything specifically. So I didn't originally. I went and started a software company my senior year of college with a few friends, and we had a lot of success and a lot of fun. And I fell in love with branding and design. And then I looked at the insurance world and I thought, what they don't really have much of is branding and design and tech. So that's kind of how I got back into the business, and let me know if there's specific things you want me to do journey, but that's really kind of the beginning of it was, I had a baseline respect for my dad because he was willing to not only admit a failure or a misstep, but to examine it and then to use that knowledge moving forward, which, I think I expected more of that since I grew up with that. I thought I expected more of that when I got into the professional world. And it's kind of sad. I don't really think that's not the average stance of a lot of entrepreneurs or business owners, in my experience.
So
just let me
go ahead. Ask another question.
Just the introduction. I mean, 4 other businesses, I think you tread softly. I mean, you took a really, really successful business to another level with your dad from a different perspective. And then on top of that, you're starting other businesses. So, kind of back to that story, like, your dad had these businesses and he mentored and taught you, but what in your life, through college or whatever drove you to let me, because, whenever I hear you speak about your father, you like, I just hope my kids speak about me the way you speak about your father. You respect him and just look up to him and admire him the way that any father would want to be admired by their kids. But you've taken what he's taught you and then, went off and started 4 other businesses. Why? Like, what created that in your childhood or college or whatever that made you want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. Something I'm still trying to figure out. Like, one of the biggest things I always try to advocate for whenever I'm talking to anybody is mental health is becoming increasingly important in our world today. And so I'm somebody that proudly goes to therapy and sees it as a strength. And these are some of the things I even ask myself is like, why the hell do I just like always constantly go, you know what, actually, that seems like a good idea. Why don't we like start that and figure it out and launch it, So I'm grateful I'm that way. I don't know exactly why I'm that way, but I can tell you that I'm incredibly, if you're thinking about, the question I always ask anybody whenever I get the opportunity to is I say, okay, you do X, Y, Z, whatever it is. What is it where you come alive? And it doesn't have to be within your business, but like, what is it in your life? And if it's in your business, even greater, but like when's that moment where you feel like time's just like flying by? And so for me, when I answer that question for myself, it's kind of that beginning stage when you go, shit, I think there's I don't know if I can curse. I think there's I think there's an idea. Okay. I think there's an idea here. And that moment where you're like, this thing doesn't exist, but I think we can make it exist. I am incredibly drawn to that specific moment. And I don't even have to necessarily be the benefactor of it. So I'll give one example. I've started this citrus tree company, which I I didn't know anything about citrus trees. My best friend grew up on a citrus tree farm, and he always loved this idea that he'd be able to sell these direct to people's apartments because, you know, his dad immigrated from Mexico, started the farm on his own. And he would ship them to Walmart and Lowe's and Home Depot. And that's why you can go to these places to pick up trees, right? And he was like, he had this idea and he explained it to me. And then I went to the farm with him and I was just like, you came up with a good idea and you have the skills to do this. And so there was this excitement of like being like, I could help this person achieve this thing that he would love to do. I think it's also a really cool idea. And I could be a key reason why it comes alive. That's something that makes me come alive. So we were able to create this whole thing and then have this company up and running. I think I killed 7 trees before I finally learned how to keep them alive, which is hilarious because I'm like, right now we're so small, it's just the two of us that on the side from my other engagements and the one that's answering customer service questions right now. We're building our first ever like portal where we can like pull an FAQ automated and answer most of the commonly answered questions. But still, even the past week, I've answered some of these questions about people's plants. And I always think it's funny if they knew how much of a green thumb I did not have when I'm trying to tell them what's wrong with their plant. But anyway, I digress. I just need to say that I'm drawn to that excitement and shared enthusiasm of saying like, okay, anybody can have a really good idea, but a lot more people than they realize could actually create it. And so when I'm able to help inspire somebody or help somebody believe in themselves and help figure out a plan how to do that, there's something really fulfilling about being part of the solution and part of helping somebody launch something that maybe they thought they weren't capable of.
So Charlie, and we talked a little bit about this before we even got on the podcast. I've gotten a chance to I've been in the audience and seen you present as part of a panel. And I was immediately struck by how candidly you expressed yourself. I mean, it was, there was no figuring anything out about what Charlie Todd, what his opinion was or where he was going. And I know that I understand now that I've gotten older that there's a real benefit in that because it saves time. It also provides clarity. Has it ever been something that made things more difficult for you because you were so candid? And talk about how you were able to navigate that and turn that into an asset.
I think it's not was it something? It's something I need to work on now. My tendency, I have this bad combination of being very sensitive and caring a lot about what people think, and then like a high commitment to being truthful and saying exactly what I think. And so you push both of those together and you've got a real cognitive dissonance that you kind of walk around life with, you know? So, I mean, things like therapy, things like having really good relationships with people around you that you trust and you know care about you, building those, you know, I think that's probably more important than anything is friends and family and building relationships where people can tell you, you know, real, honest, uncomfortable truths, right? So this is a weird segue from this, but a lot of this candor, I wouldn't have said I had it 10 years ago. I would say I was way more political. Okay. And, you know, I remember reading, I think it's Kim Scott wrote a book and she worked with Larry Page, but she also worked with Steve Jobs. I think it might have just been Tim Cook, but she talked about these 4 different bosses that you usually encounter. And the worst one is the people pleaser. And then, you know, because they're not going to tell you ways to improve. They're just want you to like them. And then the next worst, however you want to think about it, is the politician. So if it's in their interest for you to be better and for them to make you better, awesome, great. But if it's not in their interest, you're SOL. And then, you know, and I hope I'm not butchering this, people probably read the book. But then there's the idea of like the actual kind of like jerk, or I could say asshole type boss, where they don't really care about your feelings as much, but they are going to give you actual direct feedback on how you can be better, right? And so you can learn from them, but it's not really sustainable, or it shouldn't be in 2020 to kind of put up with that abuse, right? And then maybe you come across these unicorns where you find somebody that seems like they might actually care about you as a person, you know, and your career path, and not only in how it benefits them. And so I've always tried to aspire to be like that. But I look back at I'm like, I started as the first one. I definitely started as a people pleaser. And so then you're not really saying anything ever, right? You might sound good saying it, but you don't say anything. And then you're the politician. I mean, like sometimes you say something that's great, and other times you might just say a lot of BS. And then once you start to find your voice and feel confident, then you can fall into that trap of then kind of being an a-hole and not really being considerate. So I think that's going to be a lifelong journey for me to figure out, okay, how do you speak what you believe is true, but actively listen and really give a damn about other people's perspectives and try, how do you try to find that space? So I think that's where, hopefully I'm going in that direction of always trying to listen a little bit more, but fight against some of these tendencies I've had since I was a kid, even to want to have people like me or say what I think they want me to say or what will benefit me in a situation, So I try to be mindful of that, I guess.
Well, I guess, it's just managing the multiple personalities, right? I mean, I know exactly what you're saying. After every conversation with an employee, with an executive, with whoever it may be, I'm always like, I was truthful. Could I have said that differently? Like you play this like game where you just mind screwed. You're like, man, what could I have done? So I definitely can relate with that. That's like a daily, even conversations with friends. I'm like, should I have been that hard on them? But I agree with you. I think for me, I want people to walk away and be better. And if that means being honest, I would rather them, one day be like, you know what, he was right, and gain something from it than just to be political. And I know how to be political, but it's against every grain of my body. And I definitely can relate with you on that. So let me ask you this, because I know it's happened. You had such a great success in your life, but tell me about a failure that you had that made you better.
Oh my God. I think anytime you're talking to somebody that you're actually interested to have a conversation with, like their answer has to be like, where do I start? Right? Like that's how you know you're actually talking to somebody you want to talk to.
Right. Well, give us many. Make me feel better.
Yeah. Well, my first one really was I started this software company in my senior year of college, and we made apps for the App Store because that was like the biggest thing. It's like it was the first year that the App Store opened, so it's like if you could just get an app approved by iTunes, right? Because they had to approve it. Like you had a real chance of getting some downloads. And I put together a really great team, but I didn't take seriously really how to research and really think about how to give ownership to multiple partners. I didn't really think about how much money we really needed as a runway and where we need to set a goal for being cash positive. All I was thinking about was app development, product development, and marketing. That was it. It's like, that's all I thought business was. And like, make a great app, tell other people that it's there, and I thought my undergrad in management that I was still learning at the time was going to somehow like magically make me a great, boss / manager of what were basically peers who I was going into college with, and leaving the college landscape with. And so, I think that was probably the biggest lesson, was just about ownership. We ended up in a really bad situation where it wasn't, I like to say it wasn't communicated effectively from me, but I obviously don't try to take full blame. Blame kind of goes everywhere. But we had a situation where one of our partners was in a bad financial situation and thought that the business could be there for them in a way where they could take a significant amount of money for their situation without having checks and balances to check in with other partners. And it ended up in the dissolution of a company who, a week before we found out about that financial situation, we had just reached into the top 10 on iTunes for one of our apps for the first time as a company. So it was kind of this roller coaster week where I thought, wow, I don't think it's actually that hard to be like young and potentially be on the cusp of like having a successful company to, oh my God, we have to dissolve. And so I look back on that now, and it's a lot of lessons and some really, find a really good experienced attorney or advisor to talk about anytime you're putting together a business. Even the greatest intentions of the greatest people in the world shouldn't just write on a napkin like, okay, well, you get 25, I get 25, you get 25, I get 25. It's like there should be conversation. Like even with our Via Citrus company, me and my co-founder are best friends, and we're integral into each other's lives, and we are almost have like a too big to fail codependent relationship where he's my CFO and my other business. So it's like we know we can't screw each other over. There's too much at stake for either of us not to show up. And even then, we went through the uncomfortable prenup type conversations when we were founding Via Citrus. Like, hey, what if 2 years in, I'm just like, man, I don't want to do this tree thing anyway. Like, I don't even know shit about trees. Like, why do I want to keep doing this? And we went, we talked to a lawyer. Okay, well, in that case, what would we think is fair, and how would we figure out the shares? And so, that's a good one. That's like my first foyer into being like, let's see if I can do business. I'll start my first company, and
So the lesson was just make sure you do all the due diligence when you're setting up a business, and make sure you have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted. And don't just.
There's like 12 lessons from that startup, but I'd say the first one was like, hey, before it becomes an LLC, maybe talk to some people that have experience putting LLCs together.
Okay. Hire a great attorney.
Yeah.
Sounds so
just
fundamental.
talk through prenups. I think that the world's going to change. I think we'll be in a situation where you're allowed to talk more about prenups. And I mean that in like a romantic situation too, right? Like it's more about like what's in your heart and what you're saying when you do that. It doesn't have to be so fear-based. I feel like people get so insecure about being like, well, why do we want to talk about if the business goes bad? And we're like, well, if you really care and we really care about our relationships, like we should talk about this, but we go in with all the right intentions and all the right hard work, but then we've potentially done some things that will really, really help us out in case things go wrong. But
nobody has a crystal ball. I mean,
yeah.
We don't know what we're going to be feeling next year. Or like you said, citrus. I mean, I don't know anything about oranges. I might be like, man, I don't like this. So I'm going to go a different direction. And I think, my attorney always says to me, this is his comment always, if you're in court, it's better to have a document that lays out everything than to be in court and be looking at each other and be like, well, we were best friends.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Yeah. So I learned that at 21 years old. Yeah.
That's a great lesson.
So you and I have something in common that as an experience that not everybody does, Charlie, and that is that I worked for my dad when I was younger. He was a district manager for a national jewelry store chain. And so I kind of wanted to be the kid that was getting free French fries over at the burger joint like my friends, but found myself selling Seiko watches and gold chains to 40 and 50-year-old people as a 16-year-old. And so there was always this kind of pull and tug. And those of us who have ever had successful parents that it kind of feels like we might be moving into their wake have this kind of split mind about, there's a path that's already there and it's a good path and I'm going to follow it. And that other side that says, well, I can do a path too that doesn't have to be that path. Especially when the path that's already carved is really, really successful. So talk to us a little bit about those of us, the people who are listening that might actually be in a situation like that, where their parents are, very successful. Were there any struggles around trying to figure out who Charlie was in the middle of all of that? And how'd you work it out?
So it's amazing that you're asking that question, because I'm quite literally going through a Google document pages long, answering that question to myself right now, because I am transitioning professionally to trying to coach and teach other people in family business situations that were like mine, right? And I connected with a couple programs and universities that specialize in this. So part of it is you have to go back, like you're saying, you have to kind of go back and think about things that you haven't thought about in a while. What was it like when I first came in? What was the dynamic? How did it get to where it was? Because all I feel like I remember is like the last 9 months of however I shaped my identity. Really,
Right. Yeah.
And you tell yourself one narrative, but then like, was that really how it was? So I think for me, I don't think I could have gone straight into the business. I never liked being at the office because I always felt like I wasn't my own person. When I did work, when I was a teenager and I did work for my dad, I was like in the back of the office stamping direct mail to go out to customers. And, then I finally got my insurance license and I was talking to people as we non-renewed hundreds of thousands of people in the state of Florida. I was calling people, trying to convince them to let me change their insurance to another company after the company I was representing them just said they didn't want their business. And that was not a fun summer job. And so I just remember thinking, I don't want to do this. And partly the reason I don't want to do this is because I don't think I'd have an identity. And so I think the only reason that was able to change for me, and I think it's very different for different people, but for me was that I went and found success in something that was different than what my dad had a sense of expertise in. And so when I came back to the business, I had a sense of confidence, at least in a couple things, right? I was able to think like, okay, I can see our web presence. I can see the technology we're using. I can see a couple key things. And even though I'm young, I feel like I could bite that off and own it and make it better than what it was. And I can build up my identity of saying, I'm bringing something to the family business that's differentiated, right? But to your point, I think some people do make that transition where they don't have that issue. But for me, I think I would have had a real struggle with identity and a sense of, not feeling like I pursued anything on my own if I had gone straight in,
Cool.
So, Charlie, tell me, I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways, but I'm going to ask two questions in one. So, I truly believe that mentors and coaches, are important to be in our life always. Some things we need to bounce off people. Sometimes we need to, take our thoughts out of our brain and say, what do you think about this? Am I crazy? Am I going in the right direction, wrong direction? So, and I feel like people have multiple mentors in their life that, depending on what experience they want to have or what they're going to try to accomplish. So who is your number one mentor? And like I said, I probably know the answer, but it could be different. And what is the biggest lesson that they taught you?
Hell yeah. I would also say therapist on top of that, just to keep plugging for mental health resources. So, believe it or not, I'd say at this stage of my life, my dad is not my main mentor. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of a rotating position of me looking for people in new subsets of things I'm interested in. So my dad's always going to be somebody that I look up to, and he's always available, and I'm really grateful for that. But, right now I'm trying to learn about what's a good teacher, and how do I go to underprivileged, under-resourced parts of my community and say, hey, there's good business ideas, good business plans here. They just don't have the same ability. How do I help them? Okay, well, how do I find people that have been doing this work and stop and just listen and take notes and think about what they've learned? And so I kind of I try to keep a bit of a rotating position there. I'm looking for people, but just to say, I completely agree with you. I would say that I was a cynic of that idea, even as much of a year ago, of being a little dubious about mentor-mentee relationships, because you can end up in this position where the mentor, there can be a conflict of interest, especially if you're at the same job in the same big company, about your advancement compared to theirs. And, I think of myself as an idealist and a positive person, but I'm being honest, I was like cynical about having a mentor and a coach. And Michael Lewis has been doing a podcast. He's a New York Times bestseller. He's done all the Big Short and so many great Moneyball. He's been doing a podcast, and it's been basically, he was in the same position. He was kind of cynical about these whole coaching mentor things. And then he jumped into it because he's a master researcher, one of the best living researchers we have. And he's like, oh my God, it makes such a big difference. And the only thing he came away with was, it makes such a difference that we've got to find a way to provide more coaches and more mentors to people that can't just go to their mom or dad or go to their business and say, hey, can you give me a life coach, or can you pay for this thing, or can I go and grab this thing? And so that's been part of my passion too. So I just mean to say, I love when you come across somebody, you're sharing like a very specific philosophical idea, right? And so I'm just now kind of opening my mind to the idea that how important coaching and mentoring can be. So then I'm trying to reprioritize it for myself. Am I reaching out to people that have more experience and wisdom? Was I being a little bit too Wild West? I can figure it out on my own. And then same thing as if I've come this far, what's my responsibility then to turn around and pull somebody with me, right?
I love the rotating mentors. I think that it's because not everybody has all the answers. I don't believe in just having one mentor, right? There's going to be different people with different perspectives, and you have to it's really a personality thing too. Can you have an open conversation that's non-political, that's,
Yeah.
that's real and raw and authentic. And, because what I look for in a mentor is someone that's going to literally punch me in the face and tell me the real deal, and not try to soft step or, worry what I'm going to think of them. Like that's what I need in my life. So you have to figure out what you need and what you're trying to get out of this mentor. But, like we talk about success paradigm, I mean, every single professional, sports, if you're an artist of any kind, a writer, someone that sings, dances, they all have coaches forever, right? That's watching them and helping guide them and telling them what they can do better. So I love, and I'm sure all of them have rotating mentors. And I know you keep going back to the mental health therapist. I think that's also a great mentor because, I think the human mind can either be your demise, or it can help you create massive success in your life. And that's really what a therapist does, is kind of help you gather your subconscious thoughts and, funnel them in the direction that's going to help you be able to take your talents and create. So I appreciate you.
Well, can I speak like two quick things to what you're saying
Yeah.
just there? Because it's huge. And sometimes I realize that it's funny how you learn in life that when you feel like you have to repeat something or you really want to stick on something, it's 90% of the time you're not doing it for whoever's listening to you. It's like you're trying to tell yourself. You're like, wait, can we just repeat that again? Because that's so important. But you're like, okay, but I'm probably saying that because I think it's so important for me to remember. But therapy is such an important conversation to talk about because it's the same thing as mentor and coaches. Some people are going to have John Gruden as their coach and they're going to think this is the person I was meant to have. And some people are going to have him and be like, this is not the way that I need to be coached. And this is not developing me in the right way. And I've learned in therapy, it's the same way. Like I had these thoughts going in. What if they implant like false memories in my head? What if they prescribe me a medication that changes my behavior? What if they tell me all my stuff like stems from some like issue or trauma, right? And so you have all this fear mongering inside your own head about your expectations, and you don't realize therapy is the same thing as finding a mentor or a coach or a friend or a relationship, is that you have choice and you're allowed to try out different things and figure out like, oh, okay, I click with this person. I didn't click with these other people. I'm glad that I kept like searching and looking. This feels right. And I'm still just learning that, finding relationships where I go, you're allowed to be choosy and you're allowed to think on that. And then the second thing I was going to say is that you also hit on this, which I really love. This system and the circumstance around you is so fundamentally important, right? So I think about Virginia Woolf wrote like this like iconic feministic, it was actually I think from a speech she gave and it got turned into a book about a room of one's own. But there's this idea in it, and I think it's hers. Once again, hope I'm not botching somebody else. This would be the second time that I botched a woman author, which would not be great. And she said this idea of Shakespeare's sister. Like, what if William Shakespeare had a sister and she was as equally talented as him or more? Well, at that time, she wouldn't have been able to go to school and further education. She wouldn't have been able to go to college. She wouldn't have been able to have time to pursue her writing, right? So what's that mean? Does that mean that like in the history of humanity where we've like traditionally, elevated men over women, did we lose all of this art? Did we lose a bunch of engineers? Did we lose a bunch of scientists, right? And then you think the same thing with how America's reckoning with the systemic racism and the systems that we've had in place since we began. And you think like, did we lose like a bunch of incredibly powerful opportunities from an entire race of people that could have been even more than what it is currently, which has already been incredible? And so the systems, the people that we're surrounded by, the mentors, the coaches, all of these things bring out the best in us. So that's where I'm trying to, and this is me even asking you to, I know I'm being interviewed, but like inviting this as a conversation of saying, how do we challenge yourself? And I'm like, I'm a cisgendered white man from like an upper middle class family with, high education degrees. Like, how do I like think about that and think, okay, how do I create some opportunity here? How do I turn back around and say, what are the things that we need to change? That all the things that I felt like all I had to do was send a DM on LinkedIn to somebody and ask if they'd be willing to like make time for me on their schedule to talk, right? Like things just felt in a lot of ways really easy for me to get access to some resources. How do we create a world where that feels like it's starting to become a little less imbalanced? I feel like that was a really long follow-up to.
No, I think it was great. And one of the things that I'm hearing from you that I think is kind of one of the things that's born and kind of it may even be a little bit beneath the surface for a lot of us is a healthy skepticism. So not there's just not this at face value thing. Um, to to your question, I think one of the ways that you kind of figure that out over time, as the oldest guy in here, is that at some point in time you actually do embrace the fact that, I don't really know everything. I don't really know everything. And people spend so much of their lives, unfortunately, trying to convince the rest of the world how much they know, and don't spend a lot of time in investigating what they don't know and what they are unfamiliar with. And so they kind of build their bubble around that. And so I know, because when I've heard you speak before, I know that that skepticism, I'll call it a healthy skepticism, is
Appreciate that.
yeah, I do, because I know that data matters to you. I know
Yeah.
information matters to you, um, including when the data or information don't paint a picture that is the one that everybody wants to see. That could be an
Right.
ugly picture. So, how do you? I guess the question is, there's a healthy skepticism, and then there's a level of skepticism that can almost be insular. So it's just,
Yeah.
so where's the balance? Where do you find that, especially as a guy who does so much research and so data driven?
God, I think that's a good question. I think that's a really good question. I think that we constantly overcorrect in our lives, right? Whether you see that in society or even independently, you're one way and then you realize it's a problem and you overcorrect the other way. And you're trying to make your overcorrections as you get older be less severe, right? Right now, I'm overcorrecting to try to be less insular, right? But I'm a little bit over there. Like, I'm trying to get less cynical. And I know it's a challenge for me to get there, but I believe I need to be. So, but to something you said that was really important to me is, I took over my family's business, a multi-million-dollar business, when I was 27 years old. I didn't have an MBA. I didn't have an incredible organization and experience and team and know exactly what to do. And so I knew right then, at that moment, I was allowed to just admit to myself that I didn't have all the answers and all the experience and all the know-how to make this as successful as it could be. But I knew that I had the opportunity to look at the team that I was with and say, hey, we are all really young for what just got thrown on our plate. So this is going to be our number. And this hasn't changed, because, I was 27 and I'm 32 now. I told everybody, we've just been entrusted with everything, making all the decisions for this company. We have to start with, I don't know. That has to be at every meeting. That has to be with every exchange. It has to start with, I don't know. The 3 words the human race is most commonly afraid of saying, right? And so we've made that a bullet point mantra for the entire organization. You can't be afraid to say that, because 9 times out of 10, if I go to somebody like you, Greg, and I'd be like, actually, I don't know that reference you just made, or I haven't seen that study, or I actually don't know, I can't relate to what you're telling me. Would you mind telling me more? 9 times out of 10, that person is excited to collaborate and teach you. And 1 time out of 10, that person sucks and I don't need to talk to them anyway, and then I've learned something,
Right. Right. Well, you learned that too.
Yeah, they get excited because they get to be like, oh, I have a sense of power over this person, and I can't believe you didn't know that, and how could you not know that? And you're like, okay, well, if 1 times out of 10 I run into that person, so what? I know the majority of people get excited about feeling like they have experience in something, and then they can offer it to you, And I feel like once you have that, like you talk about paradigm, and you talk about a paradigm of success, I think that's a huge one. Once you realize that you empower people to feel fulfilled when you ask them for help in an area that you sense they have expertise in, I think it's huge.
So I have an interesting question for you, Charlie. And I know you're only 32, but I just feel like you're an old soul. That's what I thought the moment I met you. And at Mega, when we had a conversation, we just clicked and we were exchange numbers. I was like, I got to spend time with you. I got to get in your brain, because you have a very unique perspective. And, I think a lot of us that have drive and that want to impact the world, and I know you do, when you speak of, let me go into an underprivileged neighborhood and find greatness, and people that might not have the resources to bring the greatness forward, I can help them with that. That to me is just such an admirable trait that you have. And it's really not about you. It's about helping others and lifting them up to be entrepreneurs. So if you could be a part of history, if Charlie was in the history books one day, due to your success, what would you want to be known for?
Yeah, well, I think that I would want to be known for being in a position where I was an example that you can have success and you can earn something, and that doesn't have to mean that somebody else can't,
Mm.
right? And so I would want to be known for as somebody that came along and said, okay, we've just had hundreds of years of white dudes telling our stories in Hollywood, telling our stories through books, telling our stories through all these different areas and business and whatever. And just because they might open up more opportunities for other people, for them not to be them, doesn't mean that they then diminished their own selves and their own potential. And I say that because that was my own reckoning, maybe 6 years ago. And that's the reckoning I see when I talk to a lot of other fellow white peers about this conversation about acquiescing and opening up opportunities and creating other people's perspectives to enter into the mainstream or the zeitgeist or whatever you want to call it. And so I'd want to be an example of that. Like I don't feel a big need for attention, a big need for fame. I love the idea that I would be really successful at whatever I do, and I could just like walk into a restaurant and not have somebody taking a photo to me. That's always just sounded awful to me. It's this idea of losing your anonymity. But beyond that, not just being successful but anonymous, being successful and paving the way for other people to realize that it's not this like, this we have this, I think sometimes idea that there's only one person that can win in anything, right? You even look at the Michael Jordan documentary, which I thought was really well done. And I hate to make big pop culture references that maybe not everybody that's following, watches, but for Michael Jordan, like the ultimate was to have as many championships and to have the best selling shoe and to have the number one of everything. And we really admire that as a country. And I think that's okay. But I think it's also, for me, and this is not to diminish Michael Jordan at all, I would rather be somebody that was really successful in my career, but also wasn't so focused on their saying like, the number one way that we should rate success is because you got to the number one spot of something and you can bring somebody else along. And if that means that maybe you didn't personally get higher in your net income or higher in your notoriety, that shouldn't be the goals that we should be setting for ourselves. We shouldn't be setting our identity and our self-worth based upon these ideas of, did I reach my full independent potential? If I just said like, screw everybody else and I got to the highest level of what Charlie could have got to, like, well, maybe that isn't as American as we think it is. Maybe what's more prevalent as an America that we can be is how many people did I bring up and not how high did I get from where my parents were to where I went.
It's interesting.
You just rang a bell for me there. So hold on just a second, Jay. I almost never do this to Jay, but one of the things that I pulled out of what you just said, or didn't have to pull out of what you just said, is that no one has to know who those people are that you helped. So it is one thing to be able to live out your greatest potential in terms of being able who you can help, but it is another thing altogether to do that and then use those folks to parade to say how great Charlie is. So let the line of all the people that have benefited from me walk before
Right.
the cameras so they can see. I think in my mind, and from what we're hearing about and what Jay and I talk about all the time, is the most significant victories when it comes to success are the ones that no one will ever know about. They may never hear about it, except in that small group, where you may be mentoring a group of kids somewhere in a school where no one knows who Charlie Todd is. He might just go hang out with some second graders and read to them because he knows that a male in that space reading to them means a lot when they may see mostly female teachers or something. So I think it's really important to highlight the fact that your potential, the potential that you speak of living out doesn't have to be on parade for people to validate it. That it should be enough for you internally to know that you did it. because that's where the success really lies. So I'm sorry, but I didn't
No,
mean to
I
cut
think
off
I'm
there.
really glad you said that, because like I said, I don't think I've mastered that. I am very much part of the Facebook generation. When I was a senior in high school, everybody in my grade was so excited to go to college because Facebook had just been created and just spread, and we're like, if we just get that college address, we get, we get Facebook.
.edu. It was
And then like
.edu,
it wasn't like voting rights or going to the army. It was like, no, I got a Facebook, so now I'm an adult. I mean, there was like some level of that, right? And so then you grow up in the Facebook generation. I have my Instagram now, and you think about how we frame things and how we project ourselves and how we measure success. And I think that's another lifelong thing, right? I think you're lifelong thinking about whether or not you're bad. And Jay, you talked about this earlier. You're battling with your own mindset of what your intentions were and what actually happened. But I do think that we should have an ongoing conversation, especially with a lot of white men in huge areas of power, of saying, how do we measure American capitalistic success? Like, what are the things that are there, and what's really worth keeping and what's worth re-examining? I think that's, and I think especially even for my generation, from a standpoint of like, I really do get extra dopamine in my body if a post got more likes than another one, whether or not I wanted to. Like, that just happens, right? So how do I like think about that, and explore what that means? I don't know. Questions that my lack of any psychological schooling has provided me with. I don't.
So I love how our podcast is evolving, because it's becoming more of a conversation and kind of tagging on and hearing the takeaways of our guests, but also kind of evolving the conversation. And when you brought up Michael Jordan, I think the interesting point to, him wanting to be number one and being in the spotlight, what they highlighted is actually, be careful what you wish for when it comes to success and how you go about getting success, right? Because he was at the top of his game, but he couldn't go anywhere. He couldn't leave his hotel room because of, being number one and having the number one shoe, being on the number one team, winning the 6 championships. As soon as he retired, he disappeared from everywhere. No one could find him. And, now he owns a team, but you don't see him anywhere. You don't see him, on TV shows, like, because he had all of that. So, when we want success, sometimes we want something for a reason that is unknown. And when you reach that success, you're like, wow, do I want this? Do I really
And I
want
mean, I don't know about you guys, but I don't know if you both watched it, but the moment that broke my heart, and I think resonated with more people than almost anything, is when he's sobbing on the floor after winning his championship and his dad's not there, right? So you think about the purpose of winning a championship, and anonymity fading, and everybody looks to you for everything. Like even now, it's like, if he doesn't say something about Black Lives Matter, if he doesn't make enough of a statement, right, then he's committed some type of offense to a lot of people. So like, what does fame bring you, and what responsibility, all that craziness. But in that moment, just feeling like so human and feeling so connected to him, of him just like wanting to have his dad there and not having him, I just thought was a beautiful human moment for somebody that I had always kind of looked at as like very like, you have to just win. And in that moment, maybe it didn't feel like he just had to win. It felt like he did just want to be able to share that with somebody, that he really loved. Anyway, I didn't expect to talk about The Last Dance, but it was gratefully something during the pandemic. It was nice to have that on every Sunday.
Every episode. Yep. And that was a great moment. That was an excellent moment.
Yeah, you like sports like me, Charlie. We both lost fantasy football this year together at the same exact night.
At the same time. Oh man. You want to talk about like having like the most entitled conversation that you can have in today's climate right now, with all the protests and everything that's happening in our country, is have like 2 people on a podcast talking about how hard it was for them to lose their championship game in fantasy football. Because like, I know I could talk about that for like 30 minutes. Like, I know that like some part of me like just believes that that's really important content for the world.
Well, it hurt. It hurt. It hurt.
Stated temporarily for sure that night. So I'm not sure if it's my turn, but I'm going to go ahead and take my turn. And then Gray, you can follow. But because we're talking about success, and I think success is different for everyone. I think, your dad was the Michael Jordan of Allstate. He wanted to be the best. That was his drive. And some people want to be billionaires. Some people want to help a bunch of people. Some people want to just spend time with their families and travel. And so I think the definition of success is individual, and it's different for everyone. What is your definition of success?
And I'm just going to tell you straight up, I think that will be a lifelong exploration and incremental steps of defining it. And I think that those are the kind of people I get along with most, is the people that are constantly rethinking and rechecking what they think success is, right? So I'm not trying to cop out from the answer. I'll still give you where I'm at right now. But I always was really struck by this, like, not to get like weird scientific, especially when I don't really know the science, but there's this idea of like neuroplasticity, that your brain is really, really open to forming all types of new things when you're young. It's so much easier to learn a language when you're a kid, or an instrument. And then as you get older, you kind of lose this neuroplasticity, and then things start to get frigid, and it gets harder to learn new things. And so in a weird way, success for me is for as long as I can try, as long as I can fight off what evolution has given us. Can I be open to learning? Can I be open to seeing differently? Can I be open to thinking about the world in new ways? And I think that's how you allow beauty into your life. It's how 15 years ago, if you would have been like, hey, you care about poetry? I've been like, what? No, I don't care about poetry. Right. And I would have like scoffed in like some condescending tone if I would have known that like 15 years later, like, oh, hey, I kind of enjoy poetry. I've been like, okay, come on, but this idea of like this constant idea that there's so much to the world can be such a beautiful place full of so many incredible things. And this idea that you're just trying to stay open to it, and you're trying to fight off this kind of like evolutionary tendency to start to set into a certain way of liking certain things and thinking a certain style. I think success for me would be trying to stay open as long as possible. And when already it's happening, I was like the new kid. I was like the young kid at all these business events for a long time, right? And I'm still relatively young, but I'm now seeing this new generation come up. And even when you look at these protests, I don't mean to go into politics, but when you look at these protests and you see some of the people that are really being courageous and stepping up for whatever they believe in, you see some people that are 11 years old, 14 years old, 17 years old, and the courage that they have and what they're doing. I think I want to stay young in mind as long as possible. Is that an answer? I feel like that's somewhat of an answer. That's a round.
It's evolution, basically. I mean, it is.
There's no wrong answer. That's
right.
That's the great thing about the success paradigm is I think that's an awesome answer, because I think success should evolve.
Well, if you're not, you're dead. So there's a question that I've asked a few times before, but you've inspired me to ask it completely differently, Charlie, just so thank you very much in advance. He's like, what in the heck are you about to ask me? So let's say we had a time machine, and 10-year-old Charlie could actually make his way to 2020 and meet 32-year-old Charlie. What would surprise 10-year-old Charlie most about 32-year-old Charlie?
Oh my God. Wow, what a question to ask people. First
You're
off,
the first one. You're the first one. So look, it's pass or fail. That's how we're going right now, Charlie.
No, I think first off, I'd just be like, where are you? Like, you're not, I don't think I ever thought about leaving Fort Myers, Florida until I was like 18 and a half. And I was like coming up at the end of graduating high school. And I think that's true for a lot of people. Some people know immediately they would go and leave someplace. But I think my first thing would be like, where are you? What, you're in Atlanta? You lived in New York? Like, what? Like, you just didn't stay here? Like, I'm just so confused. Like, you can go and live other places? Which is, I think that's probably the first thing I would think. I'd just be like, oh, okay. And I think that would probably be exciting for me as a 10-year-old to think and that does come back down to entitlement and opportunity for a lot of people. But that idea that, in a lot of ways, if you're growing up in America, you have some semblance of an opportunity to have some choice in where you might go, and for me, my life as I would have imagined it living in Fort Myers, I'm sure would have been great. But the life I've instead lived has been fascinating, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
So I'm going to follow on. So besides the zip code that 10-year-old Charlie finds you in, what about Charlie's life and what he has accomplished or what he hopes to accomplish would surprise 10-year-old Charlie?
I got so liberal, but also made money. I don't understand. What happened? It's I went into business. and like dedicated all this stuff to business, but then I'm like I became like a super New York progressive. Like I think I've been really confused about that. I've been like, okay, so I went back to the family business and I did like the conservative financial institution of insurance. But then like I also ended up like, really proud about my like social and political views that were way different than they were at the age of 10 or anybody in my family or around me. I think I would have been head scratching about that too. A big kind of like, I think I probably would have looked at myself as like an alien or something, like not really being like, I don't know what steps happened, but I don't think I could get back to there if I tried or something. I don't know.
That's awesome. Those things can coexist, by the way, which is which is very actually 32-year-old Charlie probably says every once in a while, wow, these things really do coexist. They can actually happen in the same space without annihilating
but
each other.
Do you know what I would tell 10-year-old me though? I would tell 10-year-old me, I would say, hey, you're not having a stroke. This is it. At the basic of everything is that you were raised by really kind-hearted Midwesterners in Indiana that care about their neighbors and care about values and morals. And that part of you is still there. And so that hasn't changed. How you've uncovered or unpacked in your own ways, the way that you live your life and the way that you make choices and the country that you happen to grow in, the government and all that stuff, that didn't change from 10 to 32. You still feel like your parents, you inherited this kind of like moral compass of life. And growing up in Indiana, life has to be more about, it has to be more about than just what your situation is and who you are. You have to depend on a community and local, people around you. It's not this like dream of you are your universe, which I think sometimes does happen. And I think increasingly happens before the pandemic of I can subsist off of being in my apartment or being in my home and doing all these things digitally,
That was very well answered for the first time ever in the success.
I felt such sympathy for this hypothetical version of me. It's like looking at me and be like, "What the hell happened?" And so I was like, "Well, now I have to answer this question to him, even though he doesn't exist." So if you guys could wait while we record this for me to have this imaginary conversation, that would be really great.
I think he would like you, though. I do think he'd like you.
So, Charlie, tell me. I want to know this about you because you've definitely created some success. What is one habit that you do every single day, a success habit you feel, that if the listeners committed to it, that they could create and change their life with this one habit?
See, finally, like a question that I can just be like, all right, cool, softball. I don't have to have like some like psychological breakdown, of like rethinking the world, Good. This is an easy one. This is one that everybody that's listening already knows that this is an acceptable answer. And they just need people in their life to be like, just do it. Just read more. And it doesn't have to be like War and Peace and Tolstoy, just read something today. And now have read something that before today you had not read. That's it. See, I can even make that. That's like my shortest answer of the whole thing. Cause it's like, it's such a good one that it's allowed to be repeated and not just like blown away as cliche. Like, no, you should read, right?
How much do you read?
Okay. So, not as much as you probably think. When I was doing my master's program, I was reading 2 books a week for 2 years. And then I was reading my peers' papers at the same time. And I finished that program about 2 years ago. And so that kind of burnt me out a little bit at that pace. I am not some like genius person that's just like, oh, I love to read all the time. Like that was too much. So now I am just, and I think this is doable by so many people. It's like, hey, if I read a book this month, I think that is good. Now I'm reading articles and I'm reading just constant stuff online that I find interesting, or watching YouTube videos, or doing different things to kind of feed some type of curiosity within me. So I think that kind of counts as far as what I would say is a daily habit too. But, I'm hungry, man. Like you got to be hungry for something, right? It doesn't have to be money or fame or whatever, but like be hungry and find something that day that you were like, hey, funny thing is that this time yesterday was Monday and I did not know this thing that I now know this time Tuesday. Like what a cool thing that the brain can do that. And like, how can we just skip past that? And we're like, oh yeah, he said read, boring answer. Okay, it might be a boring answer, but like also people that read are like the smartest people I know. Like the people that I know that like actually read, I'm just like, yes, will you please be my friend? And yes, invite me to your book club. I'm going to stress out about it. I'm not going to want to do it, but then we're going to do it. And I'm going to be like, wow, I'm glad that I did that.
Well, speaking of book clubs, Charlie, I don't think we've talked, but we do have a book club where
Oh, hey.
Yes, we
we
do.
read, we read a book a month, sometimes 2 books a month. But we meet every Wednesday, which I would love to have you on our book club. So what we do at 1 o'clock every Wednesday is we just discuss our takeaways and commitments from the book and what we've learned. So I think we've read 24 books. It's been 2 years.
Nice.
So we'd love to have you in that book club because what I love is different people's perspective on what their takeaway, because I think there's so many different takeaways from a book and certain people bring certain things to the meeting. So we would love to have you on the Next Level Book Club. And it's, we've been doing it for 2 years. I really started the book club for my own commitment and accountability because I wasn't reading enough. And
Yeah.
in my kickoff meeting, I asked my team, would you guys want to do a book club with me? And like every single person at the meeting raised their hand. And I was like, oh, okay. All right.
Jay, that's like how I do everything. Anything that anybody's impressed with me is basically being like, I didn't want to do that by myself. And so I pitched the idea. And then everybody was like, wow, do you think it's incredible that Charlie wants to do this? I'm like, I just don't want to do it by myself. And I was like, if I make it public, all of a sudden I'm going to feel accountable. And like, I now have to do this thing with everybody, So yeah, I think that's really cool. Drop me a line on the next book.
Know thyself.
There you go. So read. That was easy. That was
Read.
Thank you very much. I was going to say.
Well,
say it a couple
also
more
not
times.
to get like political again, but it's something that we've done a decent job in America. Like libraries actually are really awesome. If you haven't been to one, obviously the pandemic's happening right now, but there's access. Even if you don't have internet, there's access to be able to read.
So on the flip side of that, that habit, that one habit that leads to success, what thing during some point in your life did you decide, like, you know what, I really need to stop doing that because that's not helping me?
Yeah, so I'm going to be repeating myself. It's mental health. And I think this answer is going to be for the people that are already really type A. It's not going to be for people that aren't type A.
Okay.
But if you are type A and you are driven and you're naturally drawn to starting things and, going to bed at night, and if you don't feel like you really accomplished something that day, you don't feel good about yourself, right? And it drives you crazy. That's a lot of us out here, right? And so I'm like that. And so realizing that it's possible and okay to start exploring the fact that there's an inner critic sometimes in your head, and sometimes it's okay for them to be on, and that sometimes you can like tell it to shut the F up, right? And so that that would be the thing that I'm still working on, but I've made a lot of progress on, which is that like meditation or thinking about the way that we like talk negatively to ourselves. It doesn't have to be like a bunch of like overtly spiritual religious stuff. If it is for people and that helps them, great. It can also be really just good practical knowledge that you would want, just like you would want to learn about accounting in your business, or you'd want to learn about the proper health, diet that you should incorporate, for your physical body. Being aware that if you're type A and you're very driven, there can sometimes be a correlation of an inner critic or an ego that's there, that's like judging you, and that's not always serving you. So does that make sense? That's something that I struggle with and something I'm trying to work on,
It does. Yep.
So Charlie, I feel like we could talk all day and I could ask you a lot of questions, and I'm probably going to connect with you after this to ask you some more deeper questions for my own personal knowledge. But I'm going to ask you 3 quick questions that are quick answers. They're not going to be philosophical, I don't think. Well, actually, I do have one philosophical one. Really
Okay.
quick.
Always has one in there.
But it's a really quick one. All right. So I'm going to make you imagine
Okay.
that, something is going to happen, to you tomorrow. Okay. And I know this is really bad, but it makes you think, like, and as you're leaving Earth, you can leave 3 things to define your legacy. 3 pieces of advice that we could put on a billboard that everyone that drives by, if they take these 3 things and they apply them in their life, what would you leave planet Earth with, and what would you want your legacy to be?
Yeah, so I'm an idealist and I believe that change is possible. And so the first thing would be change is possible. And then the other 2 things would just be quotes that are backing it up. So they're other people's words that I hope people would look at my life and say, I believe that he believes those things by his actions, right? So they'd look at me and they'd say, he didn't just give these quotes, but we believe that these things are real because of the way he lived his life. So change is possible. So that means hope is possible, and hope is something worthy to have for the world and for ourselves. But James Baldwin said, not everything that can be faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed that isn't faced, right? And we always think about Martin Luther King's idea, Jr., of this idea that there's this arc that bends towards justice, but we always kind of cut it off there. Like we have to bend that arc towards justice. Like it doesn't just happen. The way of the universe isn't just to say that justice happens. And I think we've seen that. So, I think that there's so much happening in the world and things can feel so heavy that if tomorrow was the day that I was gone amidst everything that is happening, I would want what people took from my life. And I mean the people in my immediate circle, the people I've invested in, the people that I'm close with, to continue to believe and push towards hope and change, but knowing that it's work and that it doesn't come easy, but that it's worthwhile. And I think that can be applied, in all types of ways. So
what's the second one, Charlie?
So it's really, that's it. I'm saying hope and change is possible. And that I'm using Baldwin's quote and Martin Luther King's quote as the two quotes I'd want people to remember. Remember those quotes to back up the other thing that I'm saying. So
yeah, I was just trying to write it down because I do takeaways and I just couldn't write it fast enough. But I'll get it with
everything that's faced may not be changed, but nothing can be changed without being faced.
Yeah, if we don't face an issue, it can't change. And if we deny that it's there, then we don't even give ourselves a shot to change something. Right. And I feel like I'm still so much learning that, because I'll have somebody will suggest some idea that seems radical to me, and I'll just immediately be like, well, that's not worth considering. And now I've had to learn, okay, I might not end up agreeing with it, but it's probably worth at least looking at what they're talking about,
And Greg, do you have any other questions, or do you want me to ask these three quick?
No, you go for it.
Okay, so most gifted or recommended books, 3 that you've read. Best, most gifted or recommended books.
Oh my God. Okay, well, I'm actually looking. I get to cheat here a little bit and look immediately at my bookshelf, which I'm right behind. But one of them's a bit political, but I think it's really great. It's called Dark Money by Jane Mayer, and it won a bunch of awards. It only came out a couple years ago. It was considered a top 10 nonfiction book by the New York Times. And so she had the courage to do investigative reporting on the Koch brothers and the Coors family and the most wealthy people in the world. And so forever, I will just give her props for literally going after people that could have done all time. And so the second one's the same way as Ronan Farrow's War on Peace. He's got a more popular book that recently came out about Harvey Weinstein, which is really good. But War on Peace, even though it's harder to get through, I think is a must read. And same thing. These are 2 reporters and journalists that took on institutions that were way more powerful than them. And yet the book came to life and had consequences and implications. And it's a reminder that, not to be cynical and not to think that you can't expose or work hard at something because somebody will shut it down or not let it see the light of the day. It is possible. Oh my God. You're asking somebody that loves books so much. I'll do a recent one just because I think it's fun, and a lot of people probably already read it. But I thought Educated was incredible, and it's the premise is so quick and easy to say, but the premise is this young lady that grew up with a family that was anti-government and had their whole family set up almost in a base situation up in the hills of Idaho, I think, and she had this completely sheltered life. She thought the world was completely something it wasn't. And then she escapes, and the whole story goes in a whole other direction. So Educated that's one of the most, it's nonfiction. It's a real person. She goes on to go to Harvard and to Oxford, and she's brilliant, but she had one of the craziest American upbringings ever. And I think it's really prevalent now because the whole book's premise really is, how do you, we talk about healthy cynicism, right? Mm-hmm. How do you build that, and how do you start to question whether or not you're, where are you getting educated from? What are you taking at face value? How do you explore something? And what that book is really great about is, how do you survive being gaslit when you're pretty sure you think something, or you think the world is one way, or but people around you are intentionally misleading you. And I think that's becoming a bigger and bigger problem, not just America, but in general, with the advent of being able to consume so much stuff that might not have the best intentions from the writer. That book, I think, is it's a wild ride, and you can read it so quickly, but it also teaches you a lot about like how to survive in this world where people will intentionally tell you something that is not true just to like destabilize your whole reality. It's nuts.
Awesome.
I'll be getting that one. I like that.
And then one last question. Who have you learned from or followed closely in the past year? Like on social media, YouTube, like who is somebody out there that you're learning from right now?
Oh my God. I'm just immediately going to Twitter because I think that's such a good question. And I'm trying to think about like who I follow on Twitter that I'm like most often going to press that heart. There's a professor at Yale, I believe, Kevin Kruse, Kruse, Kevin. I think he's a history professor. He's written a lot of different books. But I'm pretty sure he lives on Twitter. Like, I don't know if I suppose he's supposed to teach classes at some point. But he tweets so much. But from a volume standpoint, that means a lot of the stuff on there, I feel like I get a lot of opportunities to learn a lot. What he does, he's really good at, you'll find people on Twitter like this that are really good at doing a thread, or they're really good at retweeting a really good thread. So I think that's like one of the coolest things in the world is that like, it's like the most advanced version of a newspaper. It's like, do you want to learn about this very, very specific thing? Click on this and 9 more tweets about this thing will appear. And if you don't want to, fine. But if you do, you're like, click and then boom, 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 boom. And you're like, oh my God, I feel like I just like took like the shortest, quickest way to learning something that like probably that person needed years of experience to write those like 9 tweets. And that's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, I think he's a good follow.
But that's what I love about this podcast so much, Charlie. Like just those takeaways. Like I think if, I listen to podcasts, I listen to YouTube, I listen to TED Talks, and just, some of the knowledge that you get from some of these folks that just shortens your learning cycle is just amazing. And learning from people like you, that's why I love doing this podcast, because I feel like we just have such a broad range of folks on our podcast that can teach us so many things if you're open to it.
Yeah, you guys are like, I feel like you guys, like I enjoyed this so much, but now I'm like, oh my God, I just want to like go and try to find somebody that I find really interesting, inspiring, and then just like let them just tell me all these things. I'm like, do I have to make a podcast now? Like, does the world need another white guy starting a podcast? Like, this is great. This is so smart. No, I love that. This has been a lot of fun for me.
Well, and this was kind of selfish because I love to ask questions and I love to dig into people's brains and learn from them. But also like, I also like to teach people. So I get to do both. I get to learn from really, really smart, intelligent people. And then I also get to, bring this, because we're not making any money on this. This is just time that we want to do because we love helping people. And most people say yes, because like you said, one of the unique things that I learned at a very young age is most people will answer any question that you give them because they have a big ego a lot of times, right? And the biggest people in the world that are most successful, they'll tell you everything because they want you to know about their success. So
right.
It's helpful for people to learn from people that have had the success and shorten the success cycle. So, people ask me, I'm going to share everything. I'm going to tell everything. Your dad, everything. Like you, I remember us having an hour and a half conversation. I just started just pelting you with questions and you were just like, blah, 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 blah. And one of the things that you said that I want to leave this podcast with is, you shouldn't be afraid of sharing your knowledge with people because most people they're never going to be able to, I just lost it. You told me.
Oh yeah. I always thought about this is that like, it's so much about execution. And if you're always just like,
thank you.
If you're always afraid, like, where does that get you? It's about execution.
Well, no one, and most people aren't going to execute. You can give them
the
ingredients and most are never going to execute on the information. So just help people and share. And if that 1% does execute, then you've helped somebody. And I love that.
Well, and can I just tell you real quick? I know that was like an ending note, but I'll just tell you because I want to give credit to that. That was when I started my app company and I was at like some Google networking event for all these app companies. Somebody told me that because I had like my NDA with me being like, oh, well, I could tell you my idea, but I really feel more comfortable if you sign this NDA because it's a really great app idea and it's going to like change the world. And I don't want you to take it. And he just told me, and I could tell that he was telling me with sincerity and not with manipulation. He was just like, I'm telling you 9 times out of 10, the companies that are really good, that have a really great idea, don't give a shit about having anybody sign their NDA because they know that it's not about the idea. It's about the execution. And I remember like that moment being like, all right, I'm probably going to wait before I just like, I would still not get away from the legal advice I've learned. NDAs can be really important, but sharing information with people. I mean, I think we should all be more open and less concerned with this. Like only one person can get to the top. Only one person can win. Idea that I think sometimes, especially as a sports lover, is kind of like it's hidden somewhere there in my brain,
Well, Charlie, so I think people answer questions because they have an ego, but I also think people answer questions because they value the fact that they were even asked. That a question is almost a tribute when you ask it, because if I'm asking you, I am telling you that what you have to share is of value to me, and that elevates people. So, and maybe that is ego too.
Yeah. And ego wasn't
Yeah.
negative.
No,
Ego,
no. I mean, I think it's the same thing. Is that there are people whose self-worth is diminished, just generally. And when you ask them a question, it gives them a space to to kind of, as my father used to say, pop some buttons on their chest, on their shirt. That, well, I must be worth something because he asked me a question. And I think that is an ego thing. I don't think ego is evil. I think sometimes
absolutely not.
it's a gift to let people know
Well,
that they're
also like
valued.
how beautiful does conversation become when you think about it through the lens of right now, everything I'm saying, if I went back and listened to this podcast, I would be hearing myself really telling myself why I think or what I think about something.
Hmm.
Right. And so when you
Right.
listen to people and and not everybody's like that, but you have a conversation with like-minded people and you're like, okay, this is somebody I can hear them. Like they're talking to themselves too, and I
Sure.
think there's something really beautiful about that versus people that are, this is the way about everything and, more robotic, but
Yeah, and I'm glad that you said that, Greg. I mean, I don't speak. I mean, one thing that is everyone has an ego, and we like to feel good, and we like to help, right? And when
Right.
we help people and we give a hand, it's our ego. We want to feel good about helping others. And I think what I was meant to say by ego is you should leverage the fact that people do have ego and that they do want to help. So
Absolutely.
ask all the questions that you possibly can, because people will answer even when you're like, God, this is a crazy question. I bet he doesn't answer.
I
And I guarantee you he will answer.
God knows. Charlie, you've been around Jay, and I have been in some spaces with Jay, and he just starts asking questions. I'm like, there's no way they're going to answer that question. There's no way in the hell they're going to answer. And they just start pouring forth. I was like, I cannot believe, but all he did was ask. And I
And
mean,
Jay,
yeah,
this is something I really respect about you too.
yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Greg.
No. You're probably going to
Oh
say what I was
yeah.
saying.
I
No,
do.
I just mean to say Jay, you when I've been with you when we've done this, and you and I have been in some rooms where you've done it to people that have a certain standing in relation to like what you and I are working on, at a pretty high level. You get to the point, and so I think that's something I want to improve on my life, is that like I would kind of have to build up the courage, and I'd kind of like be dancing around it and try to like put in a joke here, put a joke there, but like you can be really to the point in a way that's not threatening or curt and ask that
Absolutely.
question. And
Yeah.
sometimes like the less that you add in that question, the more likely they are to answer it. So I think that's something I look at Jay and I go, okay, yeah, I want to learn how to just ask the question and not put all these qualifiers in there, because those very qualifiers I might be putting in there can then be used by that person as a good escape or
Mhm.
good reason to not answer my question.
It comes
Correct.
right down the middle of the plate. I'm telling
Correct.
you.
Well, so at this point, I'm going to recap some takeaways, because that's what the success paradigm is about, is what's made you successful, and the little nuggets. And before I go into that, are you okay if we quote you? Because we're going to be writing a book after all of these interviews. And are you okay if we quote you on some of these things that we took out of the book?
Yeah, if I get canceled, I get canceled. Twitter comes for everybody at some point. So.
Well, I think we have an NDA somewhere we can send over to you really quick if you want to look at it.
So the takeaways from Charlie Todd is always admit your failures. Do something where it's going to make you come alive. Help people believe in themselves. Make sure you get therapy. Work on therapy and meditation and just yourself. Help people tell you uncomfortable. Have people tell you your uncomfortable truths. Take ownership. Hire a great attorney. Have rotating mentors. Make your corrections less and less. I don't know is an okay mantra. Your definition of success is it's always ever evolving and always be open to learning. Care about people. You are not the universe. Read more. Be hungry. Change is possible. Bend the arc towards justice. Always reach your full potential. It's all about execution. 3 recommended books: Dark Money, Rare on Peace, and
War on Peace.
That's my handwriting. Every time I gotta do.
I'm telling you,
this
is. Let me tell you something, Charlie. You have changed Jay Atkins today. Okay. Normally, he looks at his notes and he can read maybe 60% of them, and the other 40% he just watched. He has executed better on these takeaways than I think he has done on any podcast. I'm going to give it up for Jay Atkins. Thank you, Charlie. He owes you like coffee or something for this.
I'll take it. I'll take a coffee or a beer.
Yes, absolutely.
I think you said Kevin Cruz on Twitter is who you follow. Yep. And be the example to hack success because everyone else can. So just be the example that you're not the only person that can be successful because everyone else can have the same level of success. And I think those are awesome takeaways, Charlie. The conversation to me was just so interesting. And I really appreciate you taking the time because I know you've got 5 other businesses that you're focused on. And I would love to follow up with you and have some conversations after this. I've got a couple ideas on a couple businesses I actually want to run by you too that I think would be good for you to be a part of. So
let's do it. I mean, I'm so grateful to have been a guest, and I just want to say real quick again that not everybody's health insurance plan and not everybody has health insurance can cover great mental health resources. But even going online, going to your library and learning about how to have therapy in some other way, or even be able to have the kind of relationships around you where you can do some of those same things is possible and can be really powerful in certain ways. And that, anybody can have success, but our system isn't always set up for them to, right? So if you're in a position of power, it should be our responsibility to change those systems so that people can have that chance, because internally they have what's capable, but sometimes it's so. I don't mean to clarify those. I just mean that I think those are 2 really important qualifications I would want.
I think that's the perfect way to end.
Yes, it is.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you,
sir. Thank you guys so much.